"Your son is in the school basement," the little girl blurted out to the desperate millionaire. Then they break down the door, sealed for 20 years, and discover something that shocks even the police. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The clatter of the morning's first customers echoed through Dottie's Donuts as Nathaniel Nate Caldwell, 52, meticulously arranged the last details on the counter of fresh pastries. His hands, calloused from decades of hard work, trembled slightly as he organized the crullers and bear claws that had come out of the oven just minutes before. The aroma of flour and yeast hung in the warm air of Harmony Creek, Ohio, mingling with the typical sounds of the bustling small-town streets. It was an ordinary Tuesday in March when she appeared. Willow, a girl of only 4 years old, materialized like a shadow in the main doorway of the donut shop. Her brown hair was disheveled, plastered to her small face with sweat and dirt. Her clothes, a faded and ripped blue sundress, hung loosely on her thin frame. Her bare feet touched the warm sidewalk as she extended a small hand toward the customers entering and leaving the establishment. Nate watched her for a few moments through the display window. There was something in those large, dark eyes that deeply troubled him. It wasn't just the hunger or despair he often saw in the street kids of Harmony Creek. It was something deeper, more intense, as if the girl carried a weight impossible for her age. In the 20 years since he lost his son, Ethan, Nate had developed an almost magnetic instinct for children in distress. His small chain of 3 donut shops had become not just a successful business, but also an informal haven for boys and girls who wandered the streets in search of food or shelter. He always kept day-old donuts, milk near its expiration date, and slightly bruised fruit to distribute among the little ones who knocked on his door. But Willow was different. When he finally approached the girl, Nate noticed that she wasn't begging for money like the other children. She remained there, standing, staring intently at him with an intensity that made his heart race. Her small lips moved constantly, as if whispering something to herself. "Are you hungry, sweetie?" Nate asked, crouching down to her level. His voice came out hoarser than he intended, laden with an emotion he was trying to control. Willow stopped whispering and looked directly into his eyes. When she spoke, her voice was clear despite her age, each word pronounced with a disturbing precision for such a small child. "Your son is in the school basement." The words hit Nate like a punch to the gut. He staggered backward, leaning against the wall of the donut shop as the world seemed to spin around him. The sounds of the street became distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. 20 years. 20 years since he had heard anyone mention Ethan that way, as if he was still alive, as if there was still hope. "What did you say?" he managed to murmur, his voice trembling. "The boy with the curly hair. He cries a lot. He's afraid of the dark," Willow continued, tilting her head slightly to the side. "He has a mark here," she said, touching her own forehead with her index finger. "Like a little moon." Nate felt his legs weaken. The birthmark. Ethan had a small birthmark on his forehead on the right side that resembled a crescent moon. Only people very close to the family knew this detail. How could this girl know that information? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice coming out as a desperate whisper. "How do you know about my son?" "I dream about him every night," Willow replied with the naturalness of someone talking about the weather. "He wants to come home. He says Daddy is sad, and Mommy doesn't smile anymore." Tears began to roll down Nate's face even before he realized it. Beverly, his wife of 49 years, really didn't smile anymore. Not since that terrible September afternoon, exactly 20 years ago, when Ethan simply didn't return from Harmony Creek Elementary School. The 8-year-old boy had left home in the morning, like every day, but never reached his destination. He simply disappeared without a trace. Where is this basement?" he managed to ask, his voice breaking with each word. "At the old school. The one that burned down. There's a door that nobody sees, Willow explained, as if describing the way to a park. He's cold, always very cold. Harmony Creek Elementary School had been closed 15 years ago after a fire that destroyed part of the facilities. The building had remained abandoned since then, surrounded by a rusty fence that the residents of the area had learned to ignore. Nate had passed by there countless times over the years, always feeling a pang in his chest when remembering the last moments he saw his son alive. "You need to take him home," Willow said, extending her small hand to touch Nate's arm. "He's been waiting for a long time." At that moment, Jerry McMillan, a regular customer of the donut shop, approached, concerned to see Nate leaning against the wall, clearly shaken. "Nate, my friend, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Jerry said, looking alternately at the baker and the girl. Nate tried to compose himself, wiping away the tears with the back of his hand. How to explain to Jerry, to anyone, what had just happened? How to tell them that an unknown child had mentioned intimate details about his son, who had disappeared 2 decades ago? It's just the heat," he lied, still trembling. "Jerry, do you know this girl? Do you know where she came from?" Jerry observed Willow carefully, frowning. "Never seen her before, but there have been a lot of street kids around here lately. The situation is getting harder and harder for families." Willow remained silent, watching the conversation between the two men with her large, penetrating eyes. There was something in that look that made Nate feel that she knew much more than she was showing, as if she held secrets that could destroy or rebuild his life. "Little one, where do you live? Where are your parents?" Jerry asked, crouching down beside her. "I live with Grandma Hope. She gets sick sometimes." "Forgets things," Willow replied, her voice maintaining the same quiet and disturbing tone. "She tells me stories about children who got lost. Says they need to be found." Nate felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something deeply wrong with that situation, but at the same time, a desperate part of his heart clung to the girl's words, as if they were a lifeline in a stormy sea. The next few hours passed like a confused blur. Nate could barely work, his hands trembling every time he remembered Willow's words. Several times he picked up the phone to call Beverly, but always gave up before completing the call. How to explain to his wife, who had spent 2 decades closing herself in a shell of bitterness and hopelessness, that a 4-year-old child claimed to know where Ethan was? When the afternoon arrived and the activity in the donut shop decreased, Willow was still there, sitting on the sidewalk, drawing strange shapes in the dirt with a stick. Nate observed the drawings and felt his heart race again. They were small human figures, clearly children, all surrounded by lines that seemed to represent walls or barriers. "Willow," he called softly, leaving the donut shop with a bear claw and a glass of milk. "Are you sure about what you told me today?" The girl raised her eyes from the drawings and stared at him with that disturbing intensity. "The boy with the mark on his forehead cries your name every night. Nate, Daddy Nate, he wants you to come get him." The words hit Nate like an avalanche of emotions he had tried to bury for 20 years. Ethan always called him Daddy Nate when he was little, a childhood quirk that he and Beverly found adorable. No one else knew that detail. No one. Night fell over Harmony Creek like a heavy blanket, but Nate couldn't find peace. He paced back and forth in the living room of his house, a simple 2-bedroom construction in the Oakwood neighborhood, while Beverly watched him from the armchair where she spent most of her days. At 49, she had become a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Her graying hair was always disheveled, and her loose clothes hid a body that had thinned drastically in recent years. "Are you going to tell me what happened today, or are you going to keep walking in circles until dawn?" Beverly asked, her voice laden with a bitterness that had become her trademark. She didn't take her eyes off the television program she was watching without really seeing it. Nate stopped in front of the window that faced the street. The lights from the lampposts created yellowish circles on the asphalt, and the silence of the night was broken only by the distant sounds of traffic on Main Street. How to begin to explain something that he himself could barely understand? "A girl showed up at the donut shop today," he said finally, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "A 4-year-old child. She said things about Ethan." For the first time in months, Beverly took her eyes off the television. Her expression hardened instantly, as it always did when her son's name was mentioned. What kind of things? She knew about his birthmark. She knew he called me Daddy Nate. Nate turned to face his wife's icy gaze. "Beverly," she said, "Ethan is in the basement of the abandoned school." The silence that followed was deafening. Beverly remained motionless for long seconds, processing the words. Then, slowly, she rose from the armchair, her hands trembling visibly. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't do this to me, Nate, not again." In the early years after Ethan's disappearance, the couple had followed every lead, no matter how absurd it was. Psychics, fortune-tellers, people who claimed to have dreams or visions, all had promised answers that never came. Each frustrated hope had dug a greater abyss between them until Beverly simply gave up believing. "This is different," Nate insisted, approaching her. "She knew things that no one else knows. Details we never told anyone. Details that may have been discovered in 1,000 different ways," Beverly replied, her voice gaining strength. "Old neighbors, distant relatives, anyone may have spread that information over the years." "What about the birthmark? How many people knew about that?" Beverly hesitated. It was true that very few people knew that specific detail about Ethan. The small crescent moon-shaped mark was partially hidden by the boy's curly hair, being visible only when he ran or played more agitatedly. "Where is this girl now?" she asked, her voice betraying a reluctant curiosity. "I don't know. After the donut shop closed, she simply disappeared. She said she lives with a grandmother named Hope, but I don't know where." Beverly walked to the small bookcase where they kept the family photos. She picked up the photo frame with Ethan's last photo, taken a week before his disappearance. The boy smiled broadly at the camera, his curly hair messed up by the wind, the small birthmark vaguely visible on his forehead. 20 years, Nate," she said, holding the photo against her chest. 20 years searching, suffering, waiting. How many times do you think my heart can break before it stops beating completely?" Beverly's words hit Nate like a blade. He knew that his obsession with helping needy children had become a way of filling the void left by Ethan, but he also knew that this same obsession had further distanced his wife. While he sought redemption in charity, she had closed herself off to the world, refusing to feel anything that could result in more pain. "What if it's true this time?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What if our chance to find him is there, in the abandoned school, and we simply ignore it?" Beverly closed her eyes, the tears finally beginning to trickle down her face. "What if it's not? What if it's just another cruel joke of fate? Do you think I can survive another shattered hope?" The following morning brought a thick fog that covered Harmony Creek like a grey shroud. Nate arrived at the donut shop earlier than usual, his hands trembling as he prepared the first batch of pastries. Every noise in the street made him look out the window, searching for a small girl with disheveled hair. Willow appeared around 8 o'clock, as if she had made an appointment. This time she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s, but with a hunched posture that made her look older. Her brown hair was tied in a sloppy bun, and her clothes, a faded floral blouse and a long skirt, hung loosely on her thin body. The woman kept a protective hand on Willow's shoulder, but her eyes moved constantly, as if searching for something or someone. There was something disturbing in her expression, a mixture of fear and confusion that made Nate feel a chill down his spine. "Grandma Hope wanted to meet you. Willow said when they reached the door of the donut shop, her voice maintaining the same quiet and disturbing tone as the day before. Hope raised her eyes to Nate, and he felt a shock of recognition. Although he couldn't identify where from, there was something familiar in those features, something that touched a distant memory in his mind. "You're the father of the lost boy," Hope said, her voice coming out hoarse and hesitant. "Willow told me about her dreams. She's always had special gifts." "Gifts," Nate repeated, inviting them into the still empty donut shop. "She sees things that others don't see, knows things she shouldn't know," Hope explained, her hands trembling slightly. "My father always said that some children are born with the ability to connect with lost souls." Hope's words made Nate's blood run cold. There was something in the way she spoke, in the way she avoided direct eye contact, that left him deeply uneasy. But at the same time, a desperate part of his heart clung to any possibility, no matter how strange. "Your father?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Hope hesitated, as if she had revealed more than she intended. He knew a lot of kids who got lost over the years. He worked in schools, looked after them when no one else could." Willow, who had remained silent during the conversation, approached Nate and held his hand with her small, cold fingers. "The boy with the mark on his forehead is very sad today," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "He said you need to be brave, that his mommy needs to come too." "Beverly," Nate murmured. "Why does she need to come?" "Because she cries for him every night too. And he wants her to know it wasn't her fault." The words hit Nate like a lightning bolt. Beverly really did cry every night silently, thinking he didn't notice. And she had always carried the guilt for letting Ethan go to school on that fateful morning, despite the boy complaining of a headache. "How can you know that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Willow knows a lot of things," Hope interrupted quickly, pulling the girl close to her. "Sometimes the information comes in dreams, other times in other ways." There was something in Hope's hesitation that made Nate even more uneasy, as if she were hiding crucial information, revealing only fragments of a much larger and more disturbing truth. "Where do you live?" he asked, trying a different approach. "Near the old school," Hope replied quickly, almost automatically. "We've always lived around there. My family has old connections with that place." Nate felt his heart race. The abandoned school again. It always came back to that dark place that had haunted his nightmares for 2 decades. Have you ever been inside the school? Have you seen this basement that Willow mentions?" Hope paled visibly, her hands squeezing Willow's shoulders tighter. "No, it's not safe to go in there. The place is in ruins. Dangerous." But there was something in her voice, a specific tension, that made Nate suspect she knew much more about the school than she was willing to admit. And for the first time since Willow had appeared in his life, he began to wonder if that extraordinary girl was really trying to help him, or if she was part of something much bigger and more sinister than he could imagine. The bell of the donut shop chimed as another customer entered, interrupting the tense conversation. Hope immediately pulled Willow toward the exit, but not before the girl looked once more at Nate with those large, penetrating eyes. "Tonight," she whispered, her words almost inaudible. "He's going to scream your name tonight, and you're going to hear it." Willow's ominous promise echoed in Nate's mind throughout the day. At 11 o'clock that night, when he finally lay down next to Beverly, his muscles were tense as guitar strings, every noise in the house making him jump. The wind swayed the trees in the backyard, creating dancing shadows on the walls of the room. Around midnight, when the silence of Harmony Creek was broken only by the distant sound of a dog barking, it happened. A scream cut through the night like a sharp blade. It wasn't an ordinary sound. It carried a deep, desperate anguish that instantly made Nate's hair stand on end. The sound seemed to come from far away, but at the same time, it sounded clearly in his ears. "Daddy, Nate!" Beverly woke up instantly, sitting up in bed with her eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I heard it," Nate replied, already getting out of bed and walking to the window. Outside, the street was completely empty, bathed in the yellowish light of the lampposts. No movement, no sign of life. "Daddy Nate, please!" The second scream was even clearer, more desperate. Beverly got up quickly, joining her husband at the window. Her hands trembled violently as she held the curtains. It's his voice," she murmured, tears beginning to run down her face. "My God, Nate, it's our boy's voice." They remained there for another 10 minutes, waiting, listening to every noise of the night with painful intensity. But the screams were not repeated. Silence returned to envelop Harmony Creek as if nothing had happened. "It could have been a dream," Beverly said, but her voice carried no conviction. "Maybe we were both dreaming the same thing." "Beverly," Nate said, turning to face his wife, "we need to go to the school tomorrow morning. I can't ignore this anymore." She stared at him for long seconds, a silent war waging within her. Finally she nodded, a somber determination taking over her features. "If we're going to do this," she said, "we're going to do it right. But if we don't find anything, if this is just another one of the many false hopes we've already faced, promise me we'll seek professional help, for both of us." The next morning, Nate closed the donut shop early, citing personal problems to his employees. Beverly had dressed more carefully than in recent years, wearing a clean white blouse and dark pants, as if preparing for an important event. When they arrived at Elm Street, where the old Harmony Creek Elementary School was located, they found Willow waiting for them next to the rusty gate. The girl was accompanied again by Hope, who seemed even more nervous than the day before. "We knew you would come," Willow said with her disturbing naturalness. The boy with the mark on his forehead was happy when he found out. Beverly crouched down in front of the girl, observing her with an almost desperate intensity. "Can you really hear him?" "He talks to me every night," Willow replied, gently touching Beverly's face with her little hand. "He says you're very pretty when you smile. He wants you to smile again." Tears began to run down Beverly's face even before she realized it. Those words, spoken with the innocence of a 4-year-old child, carried a familiarity that made her heart break and mend at the same time. The abandoned school stood before them like a scar on the urban landscape. The 2-story building had been partially destroyed by the fire 15 years ago. Its windows were broken or covered with wooden boards, and vegetation had begun to take over the exterior walls. "How are we going to get in?" Nate asked, observing the gate locked with thick chains. Hope approached hesitantly, taking an old key from her skirt pocket. "My father, he had a key for emergencies." Nate and Beverly exchanged meaningful glances. How could Hope's father have a key to the school? And why had she hidden that information until now? "Did your father work here?" Beverly asked, her voice laden with suspicion. "He was a janitor. He took care of the building, the children," Hope replied, avoiding eye contact. "After the fire, he continued, checking the place, to make sure it was safe." There was something in Hope's hesitation that left Nate deeply uneasy, but his need for answers outweighed any caution. When the gate opened with a metallic creak that echoed through the empty street, he felt as if he were crossing a border between the world of the living and something much darker. The interior of the school was even more disturbing than its exterior appearance. Dark corridors stretched in various directions, the floor was covered with rubble and dry leaves, and a smell of mold and humidity permeated the air. The walls were stained by the smoke of the old fire, and recent graffiti indicated that the place was occasionally visited by vandals. "Which way?" Beverly asked, her voice echoing strangely through the empty hallways. Willow walked ahead with a disturbing confidence, as if she knew every inch of that place. She guided them through side corridors, passing abandoned classrooms where old desks were piled up like wooden skeletons. "Here," she said, stopping in front of a metal door located at the end of a particularly dark corridor. The door was partially hidden behind rubble and abandoned furniture, as if someone had deliberately tried to camouflage its existence. Nate approached the door and immediately noticed that it had been welded shut. Marks of recent welding shone on the metal, indicating that someone had sealed that entrance relatively recently. "It's locked," he said, running his hands over the weld points. "We'd need heavy tools to open this." "My father kept tools in the storage room," Hope said quickly, as if she already knew that this would be the next question. "I can get them." As Hope disappeared down the dark corridors, Willow approached the metal door and pressed her ear against the cold metal. "He's there," she whispered, her eyes closing as if she were concentrating intensely. "He's calling you. He says he's very scared, but he knows you've come to save him." Beverly knelt next to Willow and also pressed her ear to the door. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, so low that it could have been imagination, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Knocking, rhythmic knocking coming from the other side of the door. "Nate!" she called, her voice almost inaudible. "Listen!" He joined the two at the door, and all three fell into absolute silence. The knocking repeated, 3 slow knocks followed by a pause, then 3 knocks again. It was a pattern that Nate recognized instantly. It was the code he and Ethan had created when the boy had nightmares. 3 knocks on the wall meant, "I'm scared," and Nate would respond with 2 knocks, which meant, "Daddy is here." With his hands trembling violently, Nate knocked twice on the metal door. The answer came immediately. 3 desperate knocks, followed by 3 more, and then 3 more, as if whoever was on the other side had lost all control and was simply screaming for help through the metal. "It's him," Beverly whispered, tears running freely down her face. "My God, Nate, it really is him." Hope returned, carrying an old toolbox and a portable welding machine. There was something in the speed with which she had found the equipment that made Nate suspect that she knew that place much better than she admitted. "Did your father really leave all this here?" he asked, observing the tools organized with military precision. "He was always prepared," Hope replied, but her voice trembled slightly. "You never know when someone might need help." As Nate worked to cut through the weld points, the knocking on the other side of the door became more frequent, more desperate. Willow remained silent, but her small hands were clenched into tight fists, as if she were fighting something much larger than her understanding. When finally the last weld broke and the door swung open with an ominous metallic creak, what they found on the other side was not what they expected. A metal ladder descended into complete darkness. The air rising from the basement was icy and laden with a smell that none of them could immediately identify. It wasn't just mold or humidity. There was something else, something organic and disturbing. "Ethan?" Beverly called, her voice echoing through the depths. "My son, we're here." The answer that came from the darkness was a sound that none of them would ever forget. A low, almost inaudible cry, laden with a pain that transcended any human understanding. And then, from the depths of that terrible darkness, a weak but unmistakable voice. "Mommy? Daddy? Please get me out of here." The descent down the metal stairs was the longest walk in Nate and Beverly's lives. Each step echoed in the heavy silence of the basement, and the faint light of their cell phone flashlights revealed damp, stained concrete walls. The smell intensified with each step. It wasn't just mold, but something reminiscent of old clothes, spoiled food, and something else they couldn't quite identify. When they finally reached the bottom of the stairs, the light from their flashlights revealed a space much larger than they expected. The basement stretched in various directions, divided into small cubicles, separated by makeshift walls of wood and metal. It was like an underground labyrinth that had been built and expanded over years. "My God," Beverly whispered, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "What is this place?" On the walls, there were dozens of children's drawings made with charcoal and colored chalk. Birds, houses, human figures, all created by small hands over a long period of time. In some cubicles they found scattered children's clothes, broken toys, and even small beds improvised with old mattresses. "Ethan!" Nate called, his voice trembling. "Where are you, my son?" The sound of shuffling footsteps came from one of the furthest cubicles. When they directed their flashlights in that direction, they saw a figure slowly approaching from the shadows, but it wasn't Ethan. It was an elderly man, approximately 67 years old, with disheveled white hair and dirty clothes. His eyes shone with a mixture of confusion and recognition as he observed the visitors. In his hands, he held an old, worn notebook. "Hope," the man said, looking at the woman who had come down with them. "Did you bring visitors home?" Hope flinched visibly, like a child being scolded. "Dad, they were looking for their son." I tried to explain that. "Dad?" Nate interrupted, the realization hitting him like a lightning bolt. "You're Sylvester Monroe, the old school janitor?" The elderly man nodded slowly, a disturbing smile forming on his lips. "I took care of the children, all the lost children, protected them from families who didn't know how to love them right." Beverly approached him, her voice laden with a growing fury. "Where is my son?" "Where is Ethan?" Sylvester flipped through the notebook in his hands, its pages yellowed with time. "Ah, the boy with the moon mark. He's been gone a long time. Too smart, that one. He followed the clues the other children left behind." "What other children?" Nate asked. But a terrible part of his mind was already beginning to comprehend the magnitude of the horror they had uncovered. "So many over the years," Sylvester murmured, turning the pages of the notebook. "Children that nobody cared for properly. I gave them a home here where they were safe, but some just couldn't adapt." Willow, who had remained strangely silent throughout the descent, finally spoke. "Grandpa, you promised you'd tell me about my mommy today." Sylvester looked at the girl with a genuine tenderness that contrasted frighteningly with the situation. "Your mommy is special, little Willow. She grew up here with me, just like you." The revelation hit everyone like a punch to the gut. Hope wasn't just Sylvester's daughter. She'd been one of the kidnapped children decades ago, and Willow was the result of a second generation of that madness. "Hope was 6 years old when I brought her home," Sylvester continued, completely ignoring the horror on Nate and Beverly's faces. "Everyone thought she had passed away, but I saved her. Took care of her, educated her, and now she takes care of Willow." Beverly approached Sylvester dangerously, her hands trembling with rage. "And my son? What did you do with my son?" "Ethan stayed here for 3 months, Sylvester replied, consulting his notes in the notebook. "Smart boy, very brave. One day he found the markings that other children had left on the walls, symbols, drawings that showed escape routes. He followed the tunnels to the exit that leads to the town square. Nate approached the walls and, looking more closely, was able to see the symbols that Sylvester mentioned. Small arrows made with charcoal, numbers, drawings of suns indicating directions. It was a communication system created by desperate children to help each other escape. "But that was 20 years ago," Beverly said, her voice breaking. "Where is he now?" Sylvester flipped through more pages of his bizarre notebook, where he kept detailed records of each child he had cared for. A family of merchants found him in the town square, the Sterling family. They were passing through Harmony Creek on their way to Columbus. I always liked them. Good people who knew how to take care of children. "Sterling," Nate repeated, memorizing the name. "And you just let them take my son?" "He chose to go with them," Sylvester said, with the naturalness of someone talking about the weather. "I never forced any child to stay. If they found a better family, I was happy for them." Willow approached a wall covered in drawings and pointed to a specific one, a male figure with curly hair and a small mark on his forehead. "This is the boy from your dreams, Uncle Nate. He left this drawing before he left." Beverly knelt before the drawing, tears running freely down her face. It was clearly the work of an 8-year-old child, but there were details that only Ethan would know. the arrangement of the furniture in his room, the specific shape of the tree in the backyard. He really was here, she whispered. And now we know where to look for him, Nate said, a renewed determination taking over his voice. Columbus. Sterling family. Hope approached hesitantly. There's something else you need to know about Willow. She paused, struggling with the words. She's not my biological daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. During all those years down here, my father, he forced relationships between the children who grew up. When they became teenagers, he believed he was creating a perfect family. Hope's voice was laden with pain and shame. Willow is the daughter of a girl my father brought here 6 years ago. She didn't survive childbirth. Beverly looked at Willow with a sudden and terrible understanding. The girl wasn't just a child with special gifts. She was a survivor of a lineage of horror that stretched for decades. That's why she knew about Ethan, Nate murmured. It wasn't dreams or visions. She grew up listening to stories about all the children who passed through here. 3 months later, on a warm June morning in Columbus, Nate and Beverly stood on the doorstep of a simple house in the Clintonville neighborhood. Beside them, Willow held Beverly's hand tightly. The girl had officially become part of the family after Hope's rescue and subsequent psychiatric treatment. Sylvester had been taken to a specialized institution where he would receive appropriate care for his advanced dementia. The authorities had discovered evidence that 15 children had passed through the basement over 3 decades, and a special task force was working to locate each of them. When the door opened, a 28-year-old man appeared, tall, brown, curly hair, and a small crescent moon-shaped birthmark on his right forehead. "Marcus Sterling?" Nate asked, his voice trembling. The man nodded, confused. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Nathaniel Caldwell," he said, struggling to maintain his composure. "And I believe you're my son, Ethan." The recognition in Marcus's eyes was instantaneous. 20 years of suppressed memories returned like an avalanche. The house in Harmony Creek, the loving parents, the terrible morning when everything changed. "Daddy Nate," he whispered, using the childhood nickname. The reunion was an explosion of tears, hugs, and 20 years of pent-up love. Willow watched everything with her big, wise eyes, finally seeing the family she had helped to reunite. Ethan told them about his life with the Sterling family, who had raised him with love and care, always knowing that he had a biological family somewhere. He told them how he had always drawn birds, without knowing why, and how certain smells and sounds reminded him of an earlier time that he couldn't fully access. A year later, the old Harmony Creek Elementary School had been demolished and rebuilt as the Willow Center, an institution dedicated to the care of children in vulnerable situations. Nate had sold 2 of his donut shops to finance the project, and Beverly had started smiling again, working as the coordinator of the center. Ethan, who decided to keep the name Marcus professionally but went back to being Ethan for the family, had moved back to Harmony Creek with his wife and small daughter. Willow, now officially a Caldwell, attended the center's school and demonstrated an extraordinary ability to help other traumatized children recover. On a particularly warm afternoon, while watching Willow playing in the center's park with other children, Beverly approached Nate. "Do you think she really had visions?" she asked, watching the girl who had changed their lives forever. Nate smiled, watching Ethan push Willow on the swing while his granddaughter clapped and laughed. "It doesn't matter how she knew. What matters is that she brought us back to each other. And there, in the place that had once housed so much suffering, a reconstituted family silently celebrated the miracle of second chances and the infinite capacity of love to heal even the deepest wounds. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.